She says she's in this through Super Tuesday. Is that the last stand?
She probably is, because she wants to be, but there's no demand for her right now. The politics have changed. The public is now looking towards November, and both Donald Trump and Joe Biden have horrific weaknesses within their base that could cause the other candidate to win. Among Trump voters, there is 15 or 20% that voted for Nikki Haley that doesn't want Trump elected. They tend to be in the suburbs, in the wealthier areas, upper middle class areas, particularly among women, younger women, 18 to 39. However, with Biden, he's losing union members. He's losing Latinos. He's even having trouble among young African-American males. And all three of those groups tend to vote Democratic, but don't like Joe Biden. So both candidates have significant weaknesses. And frankly, I think this is going to be a tremendously chaotic campaign over the next 9 months.
Well, but when you look at the numbers Biden has put up in primaries thus far, where there are other contenders, other options available, like Dean Phillips, the congressman from Minnesota, he is still polling a significantly larger majority than Donald Trump is right now. If you're inside the Trump campaign, how concerned would you be by the fact that Nikki Haley was able to poll 40%, not just in South Carolina, but in New Hampshire as well?
Just about every survey is Donald Trump beating Joe Biden. And we're not looking at national numbers because in the end, it's not a national campaign. It's a local campaign. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, New Hampshire, Nevada. In these swing states, the polling has been really bad for Joe Biden over the last few weeks, in fact, a few months. That Donald Trump is winning almost all of these swing states. Remember, Biden beat Trump in 2020 by 4.5%. Most surveys have Trump winning by about 3%. That's a 7.5% swing to Trump. Inflation is down. The economy is stronger. For every possible reason, Trump has been indicted 91 times, and yet he's beating Joe Biden. What's going to happen when we get to the fall, when we get to the debates, when we get to the real contest? Donald Trump should be losing to Joe Biden by a significant amount, and he's winning. And he's winning in the key states. Yes, Trump strategists are nervous. Biden strategists are apoplectic.
Well, we're going to turn our attention, Frank, to a state tomorrow that could decide the next president of the United States, with a primary in Michigan. Of course, they're separate contests. But with Donald Trump expected to beat Nikki Haley yet again, and we should note, by the way, the unprecedented nature of his string of victories so far, Joe Biden's facing this uncommitted movement by progressive Democrats who are not happy with his policies in Israel, more specifically in Gaza. If this is a tough number for Joe Biden tomorrow, what does this tell us about the general?
Here's the problem. I'm not convinced that any of these primaries tell us anything about the general, because in the end, it's going to be the independents, those people who often don't participate in primaries, where they go is going to decide what happens in November. Trump has an ethical challenge. Joe Biden has an age challenge. Trump is better able to challenge in his weakness, because in the end, we don't know if any of these trials are going to take place, if anything is going to be decided by election day. Trump's been very successful in pushing this stuff off. We do know that anywhere from 75% to 80% of Americans think that Joe Biden is too old and should not be running for re-election. So you are correct. Bloomberg is correct that both candidates have this tremendous weakness that in any other election campaign would destroy them. But because both of them have the weakness, it's the equivalent of a snake and a mongoose locked in this death grab, this death spiral. And in the end, it's the American people who are hurt. It's the American people who are disappointed, angry with the political process. And one last point, I've never seen so many people wish both candidates were not running. 70% don't want Trump, don't want Biden. This is a problem for our country going forward.
So, Frank, is ultimately this election going to be one that comes down to turnout and to turnout only?
That's a good question. In the end, 1% of America is going to decide who the other 99% are going to live with, because it's only the undecided, and that's just about 5% of the electorate, and it's only in 11 states that are truly up for grabs. So 1% in 11 states. We've never had an election where so few people will have such a big impact on the entire country.
Remarkable. I don't know if you see Nikki Haley dropping out a week from tomorrow night, Frank, but no labels might be waiting with open arms. We saw commentary today from Joe Cunningham. Haley is, quote, someone we'd definitely be interested in, unquote. I know that we're talking about a tried and true Republican here, but they did want a unity ticket with a Republican. Could that happen?
It absolutely could happen. I know from my own polling that up to 70% of Americans will consider a no labels and independent candidates, and 40% want to vote for that individual, are looking for the alternative. The highest level an independent received up to this point is 19% in 1992. That number is double today. And in fact, I believe that a credible candidate who is known by the country actually starts at 20% of the vote. We are in uncharted territory. Make no mistake. You're correct that turnout does matter. But when you have 70% that are refusing to accept who the candidates we have right now, when you have the number one issue, which is now immigration, where the public is wishing a pox on both sides, we've never seen this kind of election before.
Frank, when you talk about a credible candidate who could secure that share of the vote, is RFK Jr. credible? We saw Quinnipiac's polling last week that suggested he would get 15 if it was him, Trump, and Biden.
And actually, I'm projecting with our own surveys that Kennedy is at the 10% level. And at 10%, you don't make the presidential debates. And that's what's key. If you're not in the debates, you're not relevant. So Bobby Kennedy is an important statistic. But if he's not in the debates, then he doesn't have that credibility that he's looking for. Chris Christie, I've heard Chris Christie's name being mentioned. Yes, I've heard Nikki Haley's name being mentioned. John Huntsman from Utah, Senator Cassidy from Louisiana. There are a number of statewide political figures that could fit the bill here. The question is, how effective is their announcement? Does the public see that they're legitimate? And they hit the ground running on day one? I believe that the next 30 days are going to be incredible for those of us who follow the election, and it's very hard to predict what will happen.